You will have seen that the Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs Minister, Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, caused something of a storm and caused some last-minute confusion yesterday when she announced that booze could not be transported over the long weekend. But her office later backtracked on the remarks. For more on this, I'm joined by attorney Richard Spoor. Richard, thank you for joining me. I suggest to you that this is no small matter. This is not a trifle. The insertion of a provision around transportation of liquor that simply doesn't exist in terms of the gazetted rules is no trifle. It's not a small matter.
Well, it's a big mistake, and it can have consequences. You know, there is a problem with lawmaking on the fly, and we have that throughout this state of disaster where the law is changed on a day-to-day basis, but it's very difficult for people to know and understand what the law is. So a law is introduced on Friday and it's effective on Saturday. That is problematic. And the problem extends to the police. So the question is, how does this information get to the police? Because they're the ones who are obliged to enforce the law. How does the law get to the public? And here communication on the part of the government authorities and the responsible ministers is really important, because a lot of us take their lead from them. And if they announce on national television that this is a crime, the police understand it to be a crime. When it's not, there is a risk that people will be unlawfully arrested, their goods confiscated, and insofar as arrests are a potential source of violence, particularly when the one part feels aggrieved and the other feels entitled, it really isn't the kind of mistake that one would expect from a minister.
Yeah, because, I mean, when you look at the heading of the relevant regulation, it does mention transportation of liquor, but the actual provisions say absolutely nothing about transportation. They talk about the sale for on-site consumption and for off-site consumption. This talks to what you lawyers call the principle of legality, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. The principle of legality is a common law principle, but which has been enshrined in Section 35 of our Constitution. And really what it says is that there is no crime without a law. So you've got to break a law to commit a crime. Without the law, you cannot, anything you do is lawful unless it's prohibited. And in this instance, you can't infer that transporting liquor is unlawful. The regulation has to specifically indicate that the transportation of liquor is unlawful. If it doesn't do that, then it's not unlawful. That is a very clear and established constitutional principles, absolutely foundational. The minister doesn't make law through press conferences. They make law through Parliament or during the state of disaster through regulation. Those regulations have to be clear, they have to be available, they need to be accessible and understood. On the question of access, I think it's important to note that yesterday, if anyone looked on the Government Gazette website, you would have found that the March 30 Gazette, well, the early March Gazette was wrongly identified as the March 30 Gazette, and this added to the confusion. So even if you went to look up the law, you found the wrong Gazette on the government website. That was also subsequently corrected, but it remains a problem that people don't know from day to day what the law is. The too many changes in the law, too many chops and changes create a lot of problem for ordinary people and for the police.
And it might sound like we are nitpicking here, Richard, when we talk about, things like principle of legality, access to the Gazette. But I suggest to you the reason why it matters is partly in the answer you gave when we started this interview, that if you as a person feel that I am well within the law if I do, this action, and the police officer acting on what has been announced has a different understanding, it can create confusion and at times conflict as well. Let me give you an example. When I'm out on the streets engaging in what government calls vigorous exercise, naturally the provision is that you don't have to be wearing a mask at that particular point. But the backup is that I've got the specific provision from the government gazette screen grabbed on my phone, and I can show in case of a difference in understanding between myself and police officers. But that room for negotiation is not always there, especially if you don't know where to find this government gazette to back up your case.
Yeah, look, there's been a lot of confusion about that issue, mask wearing, and of course the alcohol regulations. And because the laws are drafted so quickly and replaced so regularly, it escalates the problem. But people are very well advised not to argue with the police. If the police say that you're doing something wrong, you know, my honest advice is cooperate. You can deal with the problems of an unlawful arrest on a later date. But resisting an arrest, even an unlawful one, is dangerous territory, and people should, you know, don't do that. Let's just hope the police understand the law and have been briefed correctly, and we don't have these kinds of problems. But if there is a confrontation, back off. It's not a good idea to argue with the police.
So, yeah, I mean, later on, I've got a person who is an expert in making cocktails. And I imagine that for the demonstration, they will be transporting liquor and coming to the studio to talk to me. It will be interesting.
People are going to be visiting each other over Easter. You know, it's a time for people to get together and to share the love of Christ. And, you know, and they will take drinks along with them. So let's hope the weekend goes very peacefully and very safely for everyone.
Absolutely. So I wanted to say, Richard, that you know, because of the nature of the Disaster Management Act and the resultant regulations that are made from time to time with mistakes such as this one committed by Minister Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, I'm wondering what the long-term effect is on the rule of law in South Africa, people being able to know with certainty and clarity what the law allows and doesn't allow. Is this helping us to sort of sharpen those aspects of rule of law, or is it going to be a challenge even going forward?
Well, you know, the response of civil society and lawyers to the regulations has been muted. You know, during the states of emergency in the 1980s, I was, amongst other lawyers, actively engaged in challenging these regulations, setting them aside because of the very significant infringements of people's ordinary rights. That hasn't been the case now. There's been a lot that's happened that's not correct, that's not lawful. There are many more challenges that could have been mounted. And it is concerning that I understand it's a public health emergency and things need to happen, but I do feel that respect for the law has broken down. You'll remember the incidents earlier on when open shoes were banned and, you know, crazy regulations about clothing and sales and irrational decisions were made. All of this undermines respect and confidence in the law and the lawmaking process. And I think the authorities need to, you know, take a step back and recognize that when they are making law like this on the fly, they need to be very careful and responsible that we don't undermine confidence in the rule of law and confidence in the authorities. People will respect the law and comply better if they are confident that it's being done correctly and properly and in a way that ordinary people can understand.
Thank you for that. Veteran human rights lawyer Richard Spoor there, sharing his insights about this confusion, this unnecessary confusion, it should be added, that was caused by Minister Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma. Her office has since backtracked, of course, on that particular issue. But you wonder if a police officer in Kala, you know, knows that a person with, you know, a few beers going from one point to another is not breaking the law. The law is clear, it's in black and white. There's no such provision. Anyway, let's move on to this now.